I'm a journalist from Guyana, and I recently published a story on Guyana Standard about how an indigenous Amerindian village is developing its tourism and food security. The government of Guyana gave them some of the money it got from selling carbon credits to an oil company named Hess. My first concept for this story included getting an idea of how our indigenous people are benefiting. Sure, they may be receiving money, but is it actually improving their life in a holistic way? I found interest in a village called Moraikabai. It's the only Amerindian village in Region 5, and it's a riverside settlement. And because of its location near the more populous coast, this village gets a lot of tourists. So I decided to invest in building up this offering. I spoke to the Tushao, which is a name we use for the elected leader of an Amerindian village. Moraikabai's Tushao is Derek John, and he told me that they're buying transport for tourists, including a vehicle, canoes, and bicycles. They're also building more accommodations to house tourists who want to stay overnight, and they're developing a website for bookings. Moraikabai is also moving on to farm crops and rear chickens to boost food production. I also wanted to give a fair understanding of how carbon credits work. Not everyone understands, and not everyone agrees that they're effective against climate change. So, consider a carbon credit to be like a certificate that represents the removal of 1 ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Because Guyana's forests store a lot of carbon, it has millions of credits. People, governments, and companies can buy these credits as a way to offset the emissions that they generate from their own operations. In Guyana's case, the oil company Hess made a deal to buy 750 million United States dollars worth of credits from the government over a 10-year period. The credits Hess will buy represent carbon removals that equate to almost 10 times the emissions that Hess generated in 2022 alone. Like the village of Maraikabai, I learned that more than 100 other villages also received proceeds from the sale to Hess and are also developing their communities independently. Many of these villages are more remote than Maraikabai and haven't gotten the conventional development that I'm more accustomed to living on the coast. According to the government, they've started over 800 projects related to food security, tourism, and social upliftment. In my story gathering, I got a clear picture of how Amerindian people are managing. The whole community of Maraikabai is involved and they're shaping their own future, and that is climate justice.
Welcome to another episode of the Caribbean Climate Calabar podcast. And today I'll be your host, the editor of that Soul Taylor. And I'll be joined today by a journalist from Guyana, Kemol. He's also one of our fellows for the Caribbean Climate Justice Fellowship. And Kemol has a really interesting story that he wants to share with us today. And if you guys are joining us, then you will already have seen his presentation on his story. But we kind of want to dig a little deeper, maybe get to some details he may not have had the chance to share in his presentation. But certainly you can check out his article. The full article is not only on our website, but it's also published in his where the original publishing place come up.
It's published on the Guyana Standard.
Right. So you can check that out on the Guyana Standard, or you can also check it out on our website, like the climatetrackercaribbean.com. So yeah, let's just get into it and make them all. First of all, well, give me a bit about yourself, your experience reporting and that kind of thing, how you got into and even climate change, climate justice, that kind of thing. How did you get into this space?
Well, I got into reporting about 6 years ago. It's not something that I ever saw myself doing or wanted to do. I just had a friend who told me, "Hey, I work at this newspaper. You should come check out what the job is like because you have a knack for writing." And I decided that I'd do it. And when I did it, it was a good fit. I have been doing mostly energy sector and oil and gas reporting for a very long time because my country is undergoing an oil boom. And I have also been always concerned about the environmental aspect, how oil and gas impacts the environment, and the whole conversation around the energy transition, and how people who are more vulnerable are impacted by these developments. So that's how I developed an interest for environmental reporting.
Okay, very interesting. So yeah, tell us a bit about, well, I want to give us a little bit about your experience with the fellowship so far. Tell us how you've been enjoying it. I know there's a lot of work attached to it, but there's also a lot of fun and learning as well. How have you been finding it so far?
Well, I actually did a fellowship with Climate Tracker first in 2022. It was the Energy Transition Fellowship. So that was kind of like a warm up for me, and it was fun. And that's why I decided to join this fellowship, which is, albeit much longer and has a bigger workload. I have found the webinars that we do with the various experts to be extremely enlightening and gave me a lot of ideas for the stories that I could develop. And with respect to this, I haven't done a lot of reporting on the indigenous communities in Guyana. So this story particularly was very eye-opening for me, because a lot of these communities are very remote, and to cover them you have to travel to those communities in order to get a clear eye on these people. Unfortunately for this story, I didn't travel to the village, but I got to speak to their elected village leader and government officials about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's so dope. I mean, I think that the story about indigenous people and how they're kind of making their way in this world of you know this world where the climate is changing so much, and they have been the first peoples to really, literally the first people to really say, let's see how we can live in harmony with the environment rather than you know, destroying it, and then ultimately destroying ourselves. So that conversation, I think there's so much interest there as well, because people may not know that some of these indigenous people are still existing, still living, and still practicing their traditions, and those things have kind of kept them as well. So tell me a little bit about that in your country. How remote are they? I know you said that they're very remote, but I mean, for instance, in Jamaica, I know we have a couple of them. They've the way they manage to practice is a little bit different because some of them, I know they have designated places where they go and like commune, but I know some of them live among us here in the cities and in other urban areas. So I know of other remote communities as well. I know that's interesting. So tell me a little bit about what it's like. Are there different tribes, or are they located in different places and that kind of thing?
Okay, so our indigenous people, they're called Amerindians, which is a very Western term for them because it's American Indians. The name came about, you'd probably know, when the colonizers, they were traveling west and they were looking for India, and they found these people and they called them Indians, and that developed into the name American Indians, because they were actually looking for, actual India. So they're called Amerindians. In Guyana, there are 9 tribes, and most of Guyana is covered in forest. More than 85% of the country's landmass is covered in forest. And the Amerindian people, they are scattered throughout the country in various forest and riverine settlements. Most of the rest of the population, mostly non-Amerindian people, the descendants of Africans, Indians, and Portuguese and Chinese and so on, live on the coast. So that's where the conventional development is on the coast and most of the population. But like you said, the indigenous people, they live differently. Many of them, they live at one with nature, and so they're like custodians of the forest, and they teach us the best way how to preserve the forests and the biodiversity and the lushness of Guyana that we invite tourists to come and see. And so that's why the government decided, we have this scheme that we're going to use to sell carbon credits, and we want to set aside a portion of that money for the indigenous people. And I chose this particular village to focus on called Morai because I've traveled in that region, and I got a chance to see up close the beauty of the rivers and the creeks and all of the beautiful birds and monkeys and so on in that area. And it's so gorgeous. And I thought, you know, there's a lot of tourism value in this. And this is something that the people of Maracaibo, they capitalize on. They developed a tourism product for people who come to the region and come to their village to see, and that's how they can make money and develop their village.
Interesting. So it kind of sounds like an eco-tourist kind of model.
Hmm.
I mean, it's interesting because I've been seeing that model growing more and more. And I think that there's so much potential in it. Like, even if you look at places like the Amazon, where, the world considers the Amazon the lungs of the planet because because of its forests. And you have a lot of forest keepers there. No, they're setting up these tree houses and these sort of stations that tourists can stay when they come. They can pay and come to stay, but it's not like it's as luxury as you can get in those places, right? Because it's not like they're not doing anything for you. They're not killing any bugs for you. They're not removing any biodiversity. None of that. So you still kind of have to deal with the bugs, the mosquitoes, all of that, and whatever. So it's as luxury as you can get there, but they're selling these experiences to people and then using the funds to kind of help to support the people, to pay the people that are stewarding the forest. Would it be accurate to say it's a similar model that you're kind of discussing there?
Yes,
Except, I
absolutely.
mean, this. I mean, what you're talking about sounds like carbon. It's a carbon market thing, and I think we can get a little bit further into that. But essentially, you're saying that the Amerindians have sort of developed an ecotourism model.
Yeah, they have. Actually, a few years ago, this German authority, a German fear, I think it was in 2019, they said that Guyana was the world's number one ecotourism destination. And then that's because of the tourism product that many indigenous villages are giving to tourists when they come here. So that's really exciting.
All right, interesting. I guess we can get a little bit more into the carbon credits. I mean, some people might not know what that is. I know we're sharing information here. A lot of our followers and audiences, they're journalists and people who have a general interest in climate change. But we also want to target people, and we know that we're always having new listeners. So for the people who may not know what carbon credits is, can you kind of describe it a little bit and how it works in this instance with the government and the indigenous people?
No problem. So just to give you a little background, Guyana worked with the government of Norway, who decided to pay us many years ago for just keeping the forest standing, for conserving the forests, because they thought that that provided tremendous value in terms of storing carbon and preserving the immense biodiversity of the forest. And Norway helped the government of Guyana to develop a system by which we can verify our credits. So credit a credit is like a way to certify that you have been able to store 1 ton of carbon emissions. And so Guyana's land mass is mostly forest. And so we have many, many credits. And by verifying those credits, we've been able to get them certified to sell on international markets. And so the first deal was made with this American oil company called Hess, the first post Norway deal. And that was a 750 million United States dollar deal. And they're going to pay Guyana that money over the course of 10 years to receive those credits. And so these companies or people or organizations, they may have a carbon footprint in whatever business that they do. So you can imagine that an oil company would have a big carbon footprint. And so one of the things they do is they'll go and buy credits, and they use it as a way to offset their emissions. They count the value of the credits against the emissions that they generate from their operations. So that's how they sort of prove that they are committed to atoning, I'd say, for their emissions. And the people who have actually done the work to conserve those forests and who really are the basis of the development of the credits, they get to benefit because they get the money. Because, if Guyana decided to, I don't know, cut down forests for the purpose of commercialization for whatever purpose, that's a way that Guyana can benefit. And by deciding to leave Guyana's forest standing, the government and the people of Guyana are forfeiting that benefit in order to provide the service to the world.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think it's a similar. Yeah, I actually never thought about it that way. It's almost like they're, like I said, they're foregoing the potential or the opportunity to develop, to keep the forest. But then again, it works out because they also, there's money in it. But how can we be sure, kind of like you were saying in your presentation, how can we be sure that um these people are benefiting or reaping not just maximum benefit, but the just benefit from their work in preserving and being custodians of the forest?
So the government decided to set aside 15% of the money that it gets from all carbon credit sales for the indigenous people. And they would say, okay, let's say we have about 200 and something Amerindian villages in Guyana. Let's take the money and we divide it up among those people according to their population. They have a system by which they decide how much money they would give to each village. And they go to the village and they say, hey, we are giving you 35 million Guyana dollars from this project, and you can decide how you want to spend it. And we're going to assist you to implement the projects. So the money is enough that each village can come together and decide collectively, we want to implement several projects. So Maraikabai, the village that I decided to focus on, it did more than 10 projects focused on agriculture and ecotourism and several other things. But I decided to focus on the tourism and agriculture because these were the two biggest things. And these sectors would empower these people to become self-sufficient and more able to provide for themselves, to provide their own food and to provide a tourist product that allows them to make money. Because so these Amerindian villages, they may get money, yearly allocations of money from the government, but this is the government deciding how that money is spent to develop the village. In the case of this carbon credit program, these people get to decide themselves how the money is spent and they get help implementing it. So the government takes records of all of these projects, and that's how I actually got the information from the government about the projects that are being implemented. And then I spoke to the Tushao, who is the elected village leader, and he told me about the progress that they're making. So you get to see, if you go to the village or you speak to the village leader, they tell you how the project is impacting their lives positively.
And that's good. I mean, very often when we are, I mean, and I mean, that's a good conclusion to a story. That's a good, well, it's not necessarily a resolution, but it's a good way to kind of end a report, right? Because sometimes we end up doing these reports, and because of the nature of climate change and how unforgiving the conditions can be, we might not, we're reporting something, but it's not a happy ending per se. Would you consider this maybe not a happy ending, but would you consider it? Um, you'd say it's like they are benefiting, they are satisfied, and it's a growing situation. Would you call it that?
I would say so, yes. They are benefiting. And once the payments continue to be made over the decade, they're going to continue to get more money and to put more projects in. So it is very exciting to see, maybe after 10 years, what will these villages look like compared to how they started out. So that's very exciting. But, of course, there are varying perspectives on issues all the time. Not everybody, you said it, not everybody understands carbon credits. There are some people, and this is an international movement of people who don't necessarily agree that carbon credits and the movement to establish a global market is effective to fight climate change, because some people believe that if you allow oil companies, for example, to buy carbon credits, then that means you're giving them a pass to pollute. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's such an interesting discussion because I mean, we've had it a couple times on this podcast too. Um, I think we almost never come to a resolution on it because I think, and we live in a world where both things can be true, where it is, you know, I understand the perspective of where it seems like we're giving these people a pass. And it might not be a great thing in the long run, but it is an opportunity. But the thing is, these movements that we have trying to conserve the environment, trying to protect, trying to create solutions, they need to be funded, and the people that we're kind of depending on to do the funding, the big polluter countries, they're not necessarily as willing to fund, to just give us funds as opposed to rather than buying carbon credits. So, it's a way to kind of finance and provide some kind of economy behind our efforts to provide some solutions to these things. So, it's one of those discussions that I think it's gonna keep going until we can come to some kind of resolution on it. But in the meantime, yeah, it's like you said, it's exciting to see that development. What was your experience speaking with the chief though? What was that like? Him describing what was that conversation?
He was very positive and very excited about the projects and what they can do for the village. He talked specifically about the agriculture projects and the tourism projects, and he said that they've gotten some setbacks. Of course, these people, they are at the fate of the elements, and Guyana has been susceptible to floods and so on over the past few years. And even recently, both the dry season and the wet season have impacted this village. We've had dry seasons a few months ago that caused wildfires, and they experienced a dry season that was so bad that it caused them to have to postpone some of the plans that they wanted to embark on. And then the wet season came and the rains came and they got floods in some parts of the village. And that flooded where they were planting and they lost some of their watermelon crops. So it was a complicated journey for them. But all in all, he was very thankful for the project and he thought it was a very good thing. The Tashao that I spoke to, he's not only the elected leader of his village, but he is the head of the National Tashaos Council, which in Guyana is the body that represents the elected leaders of all of the indigenous villages in the country. So he spoke not only about how it's impacting his village, but all of the indigenous people, and he said that it's a very positive thing for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's good news. That's good news for now. We just have to keep monitoring the situation. Do you think you'll continue reporting on these stories? Do you think you can look on to see what's going on with Guyana from your pages and stuff?
Certainly, I'll continue to follow the issue because it's of interest for the various publications I work for. Yeah, definitely.
All right, amazing. So we can just, I mean, people can check out your work in the Guyana Standard. And
they can.
That's the only place
I write for the Guyana Standard. I write for a publication called Oil Now, which would have a lot of my oil and gas focused reporting on Guyana's oil and gas boom. And I also write for Reuters. So you can also see my oil and gas reporting there.
Okay, awesome. And then to check out your if people wanted to kind of follow you to keep up to date to your reports and what these stories and get updates to these stories, where can they find you on social media?
They can follow me on LinkedIn because that's where I publish my stories. Other social media accounts are like for personal use. LinkedIn is where I post all the work.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kemol, for taking the time out for sharing your story and your experience with your story. Hopefully our audience can take, our audience, the journalists, the climate enthusiasts, the climate change activists, can take some important points from your report here. It's good to know what's going on with the First Peoples, the indigenous peoples of our region. In these increasingly pressing times as it relates to our environment and climate change. Thank you guys again for tuning in to another episode of the Caribbean Climate Calabash podcast. Say that 3 times fast so you can get through it. But yeah, as you know, you can find us. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on YouTube too. If you want to see these visuals, obviously, if you want to look into our faces while we speak. And then you can check out the website. You know, we got the stories for all the fellows on there. That's climatetrackercaribbean.com. Thank you so much, and thank you again, Kemol, for joining us on this.